Hey there, it's Adrienne Lopez here, the Integrative Awareness Coach. And I just want to welcome you and thank you for stopping by to check out this video today. So this week I've been talking about the topic, you are what you eat, as a metaphor to think about, all the different levels of what we consume and what we bring into our hearts and our minds. And in a society where we're encouraged to count calories and our steps, we aren't necessarily encouraged or taught how to monitor the thoughts, our mental and emotional states of being. So on Tuesday, I talked about how thoughts can affect our emotions, and if we are not aware of the type of thoughts that we're letting in or that we're feeding ourselves, it can have some negative effects, because each thought produces a chemical in our body, and if it's a negative thought, it tends to create a stress response in the body, which has long-term health effects and short-term health effects on our quality of life. So today I wanted to flip it and talk to you about how emotions actually cause our thoughts. And so we're taught, many of us were conditioned, that logic trumps emotion, and that we can compartmentalize ourselves into categories such as my mind and my heart. In actuality, these are constructions, conceptualizations of our human holistic experience. It can't be cut up into departments or compartments and separated. And so what happens is we end up conceptualizing or objectifying our life or our experience, and so there's a level of alienation and disconnect. And then a lot of people are wondering why they might be suffering from depression or this dis-ease, sense of anxiety, or something's not quite right, but they can't quite put their finger on it, not to mention the state of what's unfolding in the world today on top of it. So, although we have been conditioned that we can separate, our emotions logically from our thoughts, when you really begin to shine the light of your awareness on this mechanism called you, and you begin to see, really observe yourself, like bringing a witnessing consciousness, then you begin to see this construction, this matrix of the self. And this is what I call this place where all the thoughts and beliefs, ideas and perceptions about the world that we identify as I or me. And they're actually this matrix of self includes thought, but it also includes emotions, sensations, and higher levels of awareness that are perhaps vibrating at a level outside of our ego, which is our intuition. And so you might begin to notice that your ego consciousness, this mind, that believes that it's sovereign and independent, is actually a result of either felt emotions or unfelt emotions. And so the very function of the self, this egoic structure, is a product of biological needs, our biological needs being met or not met, and the emotion that arose as a result of that. So we have it's like a 3-level state of removal from self, because this is related to our basic survival. The ego is kind of hidden from its consciousness because it's at the heart of its vulnerability. So we have our biological needs, and our emotional needs. So our physical and emotional, psychological needs, and whether those are met or not. And then we have our emotional response to that. And then we have a story about those emotions and what they mean about us and the world. And so like there's this as I mentioned, three levels of disconnect between our being, and it includes, we are all of that. We are all of those levels, but the ego doesn't allow that, because it's a defense mechanism. It was created to be a buffer between us and this uncontrollable world that we live in. That actually doesn't really make sense, except for, what we're taught about how things make sense. But it doesn't actually have to make sense in that way. There's many ways of looking at something, but we're taught, conditioned by our society and our culture and our schools that how to view the world, and then of course how to view ourselves. And so this is what I call outsourcing the self to outside conditions. And what does this mean? This means that the ego actually bases itself on what's happening outside. Its identity. So for example, and this all happens within the first 7 years of our lives. So this all gets put in place, like the basic foundation, the blueprint. And because we don't have the cognitive or linguistic skills to process this, and most often our parents weren't able to provide us this this buffer or this scaffolding to help us process events and upsets in our lives when we were young, then we continue to reproduce that pattern for the rest of our lives. And it's really the pattern of, let's just say, a 7-year-old. The ego is a pattern of a 7-year-old. And although I don't want to say it never develops or matures, of course it does, but it still has that as its underlying foundation. And so when we go out into the world and we meet other people who are operating in the same egoic 7-year-old system, you start to wonder, wow. So for example, perhaps you were I'll give you an example from my life. I went shopping one time for some clothes, and I really wanted these pants that were super cute. And I tried them on, and my mom was like, no, they're too tight. And I was just like, what are you talking about? This is the way everyone wears their pants, okay? She's like, no, you can't have them. And I was crushed. And I started crying. And I don't remember how old I was. I was probably 4th grade, maybe 8 or 9. And that outside condition, this decision that my mom made about these pants, whether I could have them or not, determined my relationship to myself, this outside condition. And that's what the ego does. It made it mean something about my self-worth, my right to create my life the way I wanted to, my ability to have what I wanted. And then it made it mean something about, who I was as a person. And So the ego is working in this really limited spectrum or scope. And so part of this practice, which I'm talking about this week, is beginning to observe the information that is consumed through our senses and interpreted through our senses into thought patterns, into our mind, are based on a lens of the ego, which determines its source of self from what's going on outside. And this means that the self is not stable if it doesn't have the same things reflecting back to it what it believes. If those things start to change, perhaps you go into a growth spurt or you start to expand your expression in the world, the ego gets really nervous because it doesn't recognize itself and it wants to pull itself back to what's familiar or what it believes to be true about the world. And so I guess to sum it up, really what I wanted to say today is that a lot of our thoughts are actually a product of our emotions, mostly the ones that we want to ignore. They're the things, our emotions are based on the worst belief we have about ourselves, which our ego tries to cover up by pretending it isn't there. And so we have this complex, dynamic self-protection mechanism called the ego doing overtime, and it can really get in our way of living our life fully. So just some nuggets of wisdom for you today. Take what you will. Hopefully you found something of value that gave you some insight or some inspiration that you can take out with you into the world today. All right, I think that's all for now. If you haven't yet, check out my this week's podcast called You Are What You Eat, and it goes a little bit more in depth into the 5 gateways that's taught in the Buddhist tradition, and also the anatomy of our energy bodies, our energetic bodies. So you can. I'll put the link in the comments or above this video, maybe. All right. Hope you guys are having a great Thursday. Thanks for stopping by. Oh, I just wanted to say thank you for all the people that have just joined. We hit 600 followers today at the Mind Heart Space, so I'm super excited. I just wanted to say thank you. And we now have 600 beacons of light shining their light out in the world and making a difference. So that's something to celebrate. All right. Talk to you later. Bye for now.